I think it's really important to say like there's like too much like distance between like people. Like nothing's really being done sometimes when it comes to people having different opinions. Like I feel like if we were like some time ago, I don't know if it was like different back then, quotation marks. I don't know if it was like different in like like ye olden days or anything. Or maybe it wasn't. Our biggest problem is like some guy down the street who has like a different opinion from us.
Welcome back to the Describe Your World podcast. And today we have sort of an interesting episode because today I'm talking to someone that I really don't know. This is Chance. Welcome to the podcast. I'm pretty excited to have this conversation. We sort of talked a little bit before online, and the concept is having a conversation with a total stranger and just trying to get to know each other. And maybe we'll have some interesting topics that kind of come back and forth. So how are you feeling today? Are you excited to expose everything?
Yeah, I need to tell you the 100% truth. Yeah. Well, I'm doing pretty good. I'm like pretty excited. This is my first ever podcast in the world. I was gonna do a podcast.
Cool.
It could have been my second. Back in the day, I could have been on this podcast. I don't know how popular it is, and I kind of forgot about it. It was some occult podcast, but they kind of flaked on me. So this is my technical first podcast. So I mean, that's a pretty good milestone. I like that.
And we talked a little bit briefly. So there are some topics that I have in mind that we could talk about, namely philosophy. I think is really cool that not a lot of people are really into, but something that you care about. So we'll definitely hit that a little bit. And but I always like to start with my guests just talking about early life, kind of where you're from and what makes you who you are. So anything you'd like to share about your upbringing or your early life would be really cool.
Yeah. Well, I was fortunate enough to be born in the South. I was born in Texas, best state in the world. I have to put it out there now. It was pretty nice. It was just a not small town, not too big. It was like 100,000 people, something like that. So it was kind of the city life. So not completely like, like throwing rope or the hula hand in ranches or anything. But I am a Southerner, so I am allowed to, say yeehaw, I guess. Right now I do live in California though. So I did kind of make the polar opposite switch of things. So there's that, but what can I say? My upbringing, like, it's not that exciting, I guess. I was born in like a middle class kind of like family, kind of a big family, about 100 or so people, like whenever we'd get together. But besides from that, there's not a whole lot to really like, say like I was like super famous when I was a kid or, my grandpa's the president, or anything like that. There is, I don't know if it's like of any interest, but my grandpa does have his own great grandpa has his own day in our town because he was just so popular. He has his own little fake holiday, I guess you can call it, but there's just that. But besides that, there's really not much to really, go on top of on a part of my early life. Maybe I'm boring, but that's just so far what I can get down,
I'm curious about like routine. So when it comes to you grew up in Texas, what was some normal activities for you and your family, or some things that come to mind when you think about your childhood?
Yeah, well, there's always like food, because in the South, like food is like your second thing. I mean, I would have like brisket every single Sunday for like the after church meal, kind of dinnerish, and like when I moved to California, no one really like eats brisket, and it's so sad because it's really good, and if you make it the right way, it's not too dry and terrible. But besides that, food was like a really big part, and I love food. That's like my biggest thing. If I did not have self-control, like I would be like way too big to really go go get it, because food is like probably my second hobby from like say like reading or writing or being all like nerdy is probably I'm a ginormous like foodie, Thank God I'm not like super rich, because I would just have too much food at my disposal. But yeah,
that's cool. So brisket was a big thing. Is there anything that you still like to eat now that is sort of a callback?
I'm trying to like think off the top of my head. Not a whole lot, because when it comes like, okay, no, never mind. Whataburger. I try, it's so much better
What a burger.
than Whataburger. It's so good. It's not as good as like McDonald's or something like that because McDonald's is like the classic for everywhere. But I came to California and I tried like the In-N-Out burger. Oh my god, it's not that great. I don't know if you live in California or if you've ever been, but the In-N-Out burger. I don't know if like a listener is gonna like really get mad. The In-N-Out burger is not that good. It's cheap, but
Mhm.
it's cheap for a reason.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm from North Carolina, the foothills. So we do have Whataburger. We just got our first Whataburger in town
Yeah.
several months back, and it was kind of a big deal because before it was like a little food stand or something like that, or like a little barbecue shack,
Mhm.
and they converted it into a Whataburger, and people were all about it. So I don't know that I've had an In-N-Out burger before, but I know that it's a lot more of a thing, out on your side of the country.
Yeah.
So early life, food was a big thing. Are you guys? Did you go to public school, private school?
I went to private school for a good chunk of elementary. I went to a private school. It wasn't necessarily like a Christian like private school because there's a lot of like private schools are fairly Christian, but I did go to a private school in town. It was kind of Catholic now that I think about it. A lot of Catholics went there, so there's
Mhm.
that. But it was never like we had to pray like to Mary like in the morning or anything. So it was nice though. I did like it. It was just one of those like things that my parents like really wanted me to get into like good schools because I was born with like dyslexia, and when I was like a kid, I was like pretty bad. I was like
Mhm.
really couldn't do a whole lot of like schoolwork because I probably have ADHD. My parents never really they never really touched that subject too much, but I'm probably ADHD too. Like so on top of the dyslexia, there's like the ADHD that like couldn't focus, and then when I could focus, I didn't know what was going on. So it was one of those things that I struggled with, but I eventually got like a grasp of. But yeah, I was like in like
Mhm.
a pretty good school. My parents always wanted me to go into good schools and try to like find the best school and like try to like shove me in there so that I can try to do my work if I ever did. But yeah, but my elementary school was like a private school, but then the middle school and the high school was a public school. And that was my first like middle school was my first like public school, so I was like really in the deep of it because I didn't know the public school life. In middle schools, it's
Mhm.
it's like I would argue that middle school is worse than high school because you have all the kids that have like their little phases. I had my emo phase in middle school. I listened to 21 Pilots. I knew what I was doing. I understood the assignment, and then I had that little phase, and then but it was weird because it was the culture shock of like going from like a little quiet private school and then shifting over to like a public middle school and then a public high school. But the high school I got used to pretty quick because that you kind of have to. It's either like the just like surf the years of high school and then you just get out of it. But the the schooling was pretty good though. I did go into like okay schools for middle school and high school. They were like predominantly like on the richer side of town, so like next to like the country club or something like that. Which I never went to the country
Hmm.
club either, so that was the funny part about it.
Yeah, I'm curious because you mentioned dyslexia as well as potentially being ADHD. So, I mean, you come across as very intelligent and very well spoken. So I'm curious if you had any like struggles, academically when you were young.
When I was young, I had a really big trouble with really everything apart from history. I really loved history. Like even when I was younger, I love history, and I still do. History is pretty cool because it's fairly easy to understand. There's no really like convoluted thinking to to do. I mean, sometimes, but like with math, like I still can't do math. Like if there was like a problem at hand that required math and it was life or death, I'm already dead. I might as well start laying on the ground and praying because it's already done for. Reading and writing, I had like a really big struggle with, which is pretty ironic because I read Hegel now and Kant and all these like really, I mean, like people who are like really good at reading have like a really big struggle with reading like philosophy of that, like the later forms of like philosophy, like people like struggle with that are good readers. And then I had this upbringing of like really bad reading, like I could not spell. Like for instance, I remember trying to do the spelling test, and if I couldn't spell a word, I would just like look around the room at a word that's on the wall, just write down that word because I wouldn't even try sometimes, which is just hilarious. But yeah, I had a really big like struggle with that. But when it came to like middle school, I kind of got better at the reading and writing part. The math part, it never got better. It never improved. I'm still in that hole. But yeah, but I have a calculator on my phone, so I'm really safe, I hope.
Yeah, it's interesting too, and a couple of things that you mentioned. I mean, I understand maybe the school you went to wasn't a Catholic school, but you said a lot of Catholics went to that school in
Yeah.
sort of a private setting. But
Mhm.
my mom, she's taught in private schools my whole life, and ever since I was little, and I was really raised in Christian schools all the way through Christian curriculum and everything. And so there were definitely some kids who had dyslexia and ADHD who would come through, and a lot of times, parents would look for things in situations like that because you have more of a one-to-one kind of interaction with the teacher,
Yeah.
which I think helps a lot of kids, especially if they're struggling to focus or struggling to read or what have you. But I mean, other than math, it sounds like you kind of came through on a good side of things and you overcame some of those, difficulties.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Like the reading and writing part, because I found more like of a hobby in reading and writing. So I guess there's more like personal
Mm-hmm.
want to do it. So there's more of a drive, I guess. Like besides from like
Mm-hmm.
math, I have no drive for. Like I'm not becoming an accountant. So I have no drive for it, I guess. So I guess that's an important part of like, the like getting into stuff that like is really hard and like really like difficult for people. If you have a drive for it, you're gonna
Mm-hmm.
like get it done usually. But if you don't, I mean, it's just more of a struggle through the mud of like math for me or something or like whatever it is for anyone else. Yeah, like it's just
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that could be like the ADHD though too, like me like having to focus on it. The once I liked like the whole like philosophical like writing and the reading, I was like, okay, this is cool. I might give it a shot now. And then I got into it and got okay at it. But like yeah, but I also used to have like a very bad like stutter, so I was like the problem child. I had everything wrong with me. I had ADHD, probably. I had dyslexia, maybe autism. I don't know yet. I'm planning on doing a test for that too. And then I stuttered, so I had all of the criteria for just philosophy major. Basically, I was set in gold for it because like I was just off to the side really, and I feel like that's what makes philosophers. Like you see all these people like like Plato, like Kant. Those dudes never had a party in their life. Those dudes never went to like anything cool. I mean, maybe Plato, but Kant never did. That was his whole like like funny personal life. I feel like most
Mm-hmm.
philosophers are just like the social outcasts of history that like that just somehow made something work for them. you know, I think that's my theory, like of it at least. But like besides from that, I think that most people who have like some sort of like antisocial or asocial, not antisocial, like an asocial personality. I think half the times that they're like not as intelligent like as people, but it's like a little bit smarter. Not to like gloat like yeah me. I'm the smarter guy in the room. Not to say that, but I mean, I like because they have more time like to themselves. I guess like there's less time and focus on like preparing yourself for like social like life. So you only have personal life, and you have just a lot of like self improvement, really. So I think it's like the trade off of things. At least that's
It brings
my
up a good question too. It brings up a good question too. You mentioned you were sort of the problem child. So, and I've seen this before in school. And it's like, if you have the stutter or you're a little bit more active or you can't focus as well, a lot of times a teacher will pull you aside and be like, "Oh, this is a disciplinary problem." When in reality,
Yeah.
it's more of just part of your nature and how you think
Hmm.
about things and how you see the world. So, I wonder if that was ever like, did you ever feel like you were being punished for being the way you are?
Uh, Not necessarily. I understood that like I was just a little bit dumber, really. So I just didn't know what was going on. Like, but for instance, like sometimes like I'd stutter, and then like my parents would always try to help. They'd say like, hey, you're stuttering, and then I'd stop the conversation. I'd walk out of the room. If like you
Mhm.
just like let me stutter and like get done with the conversation, I'd be happy. But they would always like want to like help me like correct it, which I guess I was like too stubborn to correct it. I mean, I got out of it. I still stutter if you can't tell, but it used to be like 10 times worse. Kind of like what
Mhm.
kids have like when they stutter, it takes them a full minute to get out to get out a sentence. That was me. I was one of those like kids, and then I would always have like I was never like really in big trouble. At least I don't think so, or at least I don't like remember. I was like an okay child in school. I never really like act up too much. But like besides from
Good.
me like just not knowing what the hell I was doing, like there was just the like I guess maybe the struggle of the teacher trying to teach me, trying to teach this kid who really didn't know what was going on. But there's also this one thing that I once read how like there's like sometimes like there's this case in psychology where like sometimes like some people would say like you should not teach not teach but like tell a teacher about some children who have some sort of like not problem but like a neurodivergency, I guess you can say, or some sort of like
Mhm.
attention like deficit or whatever you'd call it. But there's this like case that like people would say you shouldn't tell a teacher that because that will like lead the teacher to act differently around that, and then that wouldn't gauge where they are. That would just like set them back because I guess like on like a linear process saying like over here is the kid who is just he's neurotypical normal, like quotation marks, and then you have like the kid who has some sort of like nerd like deficiency or some attention span problem, and then like you like make this president for him, this like well not president, I forgot the word, this like this like system where they're back here, they're up there. You leave out the room like between those two things where it could be like just a little bit better. Yeah, I think it's just some like varying degree, and like you're like bringing it back, not allowing it to like organically form. Instead of like
Mhm.
saying like if you had a problem, instead of me like gauging a problem like between like some things, then it would be just just a little bit more hurtful than that.
So one thing that I'm curious about that you were talking about, having ADHD and or potentially ADHD, and then some other difficulties. How was your social life? Did you befriend people fairly easily?
Well, I was a lot quieter than I am now. Like if I saw myself like talking now like on a podcast, I'd freak out. Like when I was like younger, I would when I was younger, I really didn't have that big of a friend group, or at certain times a friend group at all. Like there was just like to like think I'd have like one friend group of like 3 or 4 people, and that's kind of it. And I'd have that entire friend group
Mhm.
from like middle school to high school. Like as far as I could get, pretty much. Like
Mhm.
but I feel like that wasn't like as bad. I mean, like I wouldn't like trade that over for like having like a ginormous friend group or anything because it was so cool. I mean, it was all the weird kids like in the class, but I mean, they were still cool people, and I still have like the numbers of like some of my old friends from high school because like besides the point that I graduated like 2 years ago. I mean, but besides that, I just like to keep in touch and everything. But nowadays, I am a lot more like open, not open, but talkative, I guess. Like I could make a conversation with just like a random person in the store, maybe if I'm shopping and I'm like wondering about like a certain like item. I'll just like talk to someone about it, and like when I was like 16, 15, 14, I would have died inside if I didn't know how to like like what this is or like whatever, and I needed help with something. I just die inside because I didn't know how to like assess that. But nowadays I'm like very talkative. I'm very like open about myself, really. So it's like I've like I've cocooned out of the shell. I've improved.
It's really interesting, and I feel the same because when I was younger, I mean, I was interactive with other kids in school, and I mean, I had friends, I guess you could say, but I found myself having fewer and fewer friends as I got older. But now having a conversation is fairly simple. Like I'm pretty open to talk and establish that line of communication and just kind of bounce ideas off of someone, whether I know them or not. And I think it just kind of gets easier naturally as we get older. So, obviously school helps a lot with that. I'm sure going to college is probably a big part of it too.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, for my college, like half of it is online, so I mean, there's that, which I don't mind, but it really isn't that bad. I mean, w- when it comes down to like to being open, I guess, and talkative, I think that's just a part of like growing up. You kind of like realize that you have
Mm.
to you have to engage with the world just a little bit, so you kind of like grow up and just kind of like tough it through a little bit. But I enjoy talking though. Like
Mm.
some days I'll like be upset because I didn't talk to anybody, or some days I'll be just
Mm.
like in a funk because I need to go like just have a conversation. Like for instance, how I met you on Omegle. I'll just do that because no one's home, and I'm just
Mm-hmm.
bored, and I just need someone to talk to, really, not in like a depressive way, but just I'm bored, I just need to have just to like like liven up the day a little bit. I'll get like in a bad mood if I just don't talk to somebody, but when I was like I said, like 16 to like 13, I would like be in a bad mood. In the opposite, if I did talk to someone, I'd be in a bad mood. But like the whole role kind of like flipped, I guess, and it's just
Mm.
kind of interesting how it went along, how my personality kind of just went from like one opposite to like the other, really.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious before we get into your studies, because that's probably one of the bigger topics that I want to kind of
Yeah.
understand a little bit better and maybe learn something from you. What are some of your interests? Because we briefly talked about Star Wars, which I think is personally a great interest to have. I mean, you can look at my
Yeah.
background and see that I've got a bunch of Star Wars crap in my room. So just curious,
Yeah.
some of those like maybe childhood things that carried over into adulthood.
Um, I did love Star Wars. I didn't love Star Wars as a kid as much as I should have. I should have liked it more, but I didn't like it too much because I thought like because my dad would like show me like the originals, and I thought it was so boring. I did not think it was cool at all. But I got into high school, and I met a guy that I played Xbox with him, and he liked Star Wars too. He would like cosplay on TikTok, and he got a good amount of views actually. I won't like expose him, but if he watches this, he knows who he is. But I talked to him, and he likes Star Wars, and so I kind of got into it, and I got into it like a lot. I would like watch the movies, and then I'd be like, man, because I love lore, like stories. I like history, and I love like alt histories, of course. Who doesn't? But like, I would love to spend hours like watching random videos about Star Wars canon or like the Star Wars expanded universe. Man, I would gobble it up. It was so good. But but I'm kind of like that way for all things. Like,
Mm.
like right now, I'm in the Elder Scrolls, like Skyrim kind of funk. I'm in that move right now. So I will sit if I have free time off work, I will spend like an hours like just like spend like the hours long like videos of like just like the complete lore of like the Elder Scrolls and just be completely satisfied. It's just like it puts my
Hmm.
mind at ease. Like learning about like lore and like just like fantasy stuff like that. That just like puts me into like this kind of like mode where I'm just like perfectly fine. There's nothing to worry about.
It seems
But
like
like apart
almost
from like
that, and I don't know if this is the case for you, but it almost seems like you have a mind like a collector type mind, like all these stories, all these characters, all these individual aspects of your interest. You like to compile those and formulate like a picture of it so you can understand it.
yeah, definitely. I, I do like that. And then like on like the topic of like hobbies, there was like of course like video games, which you can see in the back, and also books for people who are
Mm.
like listening to like the podcast. Of course, you can't see, but there is like a tiny bookshelf in the back which has like all my philosophy on it, and there is. I would show you, but I don't want to like move my computer because it's like a map. It's like a whole entire like screen. But there are like a bunch of like medieval stuff like up there. I do like there's like medieval helmets. There's a whole entire like armor that I could LARP in. I could go. I forget what it's called. It starts with an H, but like where people like really fight, I could take the armor and go fight and get hit by like a blunt weapon and be kind of fine. Which sounds kind of fun. I won't lie. It does sound kind of fun. It doesn't fit me, but it sounds fun. But like apart from hobbies, I do love like reenactment. I've always wanted to do reenactment. I don't know what kind, but like reenactment sounds cool. Like especially when they have like those like camping ones where they'll like say they're like it's some like Civil War, like World War II, like War of Independence maybe, kind of thing, and they'll like go camping in the woods for like 3 days with like nothing but like rations and your weapon. Man, that feels cool. It feels like I'm a part of something. I wish I could do that though. It's a lot of money
Yeah,
to do that.
there's there was an episode of Supernatural. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but there was a character who was really into LARPing and cosplay and those kind of things. And so they had a couple of episodes that were specifically about that, which I think is really cool.
That's awesome.
But it's interesting to me, like the idea of role playing, because whenever you get into role play, like you can put yourself in that world and really structure that character around who you are, sort of as like a shield or just for entertainment purposes or whatever. And I'm sure there's some unique like tie to your philosophy and your opinions
Maybe.
about the world in there. There has to be, right? Because it's philosophy. There
Yeah,
has to be a tie. So,
definitely. And a part I'm more on like hobbies and interests because it's all I have. It's all I have in my life is this random hobby and interests. I love learning about like spirituality, not like spirituality, just spirituality, like the because spirituality sometimes has like a negative connotation, but like religion, like in a whole, like like for instance, you're a Christian, and I probably couldn't, but I would like sometimes like what I could do is like just like I know the sorry, it's hard to say the word denominations of like Christianity. I wouldn't call myself a Christian,
Mhm.
but I do like love to have like just like this like knowledge of like say like the Greek Orthodox Church or the Catholic Church or maybe like the Seventh Day Adventists, the Mormons because the Mormons are kind of wacky. No offense to Mormons, but it is kind of it's interesting. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But yeah, I do have like
Yeah, and there's
all
something
of
there's a whole like lore behind the Christian religion in itself. You start with like the Roman Catholic Church and all these branches that come from there. You have Protestants and all the branches of Protestantism that come out of that too. And it's interesting because it's a whole like I mean it's like Skyrim. It's a whole world in and of itself, and everybody
it's
has their own. I read a book in college called Habits of the Heart, and in this book the writer talks about how there are 100,000 unique versions of Christianity in the United States
yeah.
alone, just
Mhm.
because people have their own little like perspective or
Yeah,
worldview of Christianity and how they kind of tweak it to suit their own needs and things like that.
I do love to like read about like, for instance, I have like too many books on like Buddhism or Hinduism or like European paganism. I have a bunch of those or like magic. I have like the Necronomicon, which I heard you're not supposed to read, but I have that too. Just random stuff like that, like bits and bobs like that. And I did grow up. Look in the South, like Southern Catholic, and Southern Catholics are like a whole different breed of like regular Catholics. I did grow up Catholic, which was weird because on my dad's side they were like very heavy Protestant. My dad's side, my grandpa, he's Pentecostal. I mean, if you ask him his opinion on like the Catholic Church, you'd be sitting down for like a few hours because he's he's like really big into the Pentecostal Church, which in my opinion is kind of weird because it was like the history of like the Pentecostal church is like I forgot what street it was on, but like it was like these four guys in this building, not to be like derogatory towards like the Pentecostal church, of course. These like four guys in a building had like some like revelation about like the day of Pentecost, and they had, like form a whole entire church on top of that, which I think is just kind of interesting how people will have like just like this idea or this notion, and they'll just like create an entire church, which like millions of people will now attend that church. And it was just these four guys that thought that this church was wrong, and so they made a new one, and now millions of people are Pentecostal. Like, and when I would sometimes go to his church, they would talk about how they had like they would like fund so many things. Like for instance, they had like this church that they funded in the Philippines, which I thought was cool, and then they had like a conversion place in Romania, which I thought was so random. Because I could never think of someone going to a Pentecostal church in like Romania. I just can't imagine that. But that's kind of cool though. I do love like the history of the church. Me myself, I'm not a Christian. I don't believe in the it's not like I don't like it. Like I don't like Christianity, therefore I liked it. I won't believe in it. I don't think that's very valuable when it comes to like people and their opinion. It's like, oh, I don't believe that, for instance, I'm a gay man, so I have a partner, and I know some people who will like come from my perspective and say, "Oh, the church is way too against homosexuality. I could never be a Christian," which I think is sometimes wrong to say, like, "Oh, the church that says that this is bad, therefore I should abandon the church." That's kind of proving the church's point, just a little
Hmm.
bit. But I would never go against Christianity in that sense. I would personally go against it because of its metaphysics. I don't believe in the Trinity. That's why I don't believe in Christianity. I don't think the Trinity is very like probable when it comes like a
Hmm.
metaphysical argument. I think that when it comes to like God, I think it's one big like overarching like omnipotent. It's like you could argue that it's like a being at all. It's almost like everything. I'm a pantheist because of
Hmm.
Hegel. Think, you know. So I believe that kind of everything has this kind of connection to the absolute totality of reality. Because all of reality is, of course, a source of, total reality, of course. So I think that God is more or less in touch with all things, that there's no separation from God, really. So that the Trinity being like multiple aspects, not the same person, but not different, I think it's safe to say like it's all the same being, like me and you come from the same source. Me and
Hmm.
my phone come from the same source, which sounds kind of weird, but I think some people can understand that. All of Earth, all of like the universe, come from one thing. Like there's a builder to the building, and that whole argument. I think that it's safe to say, like, from my opinion, it's very like dulled down sometimes when people like talk to me and they question my religion. They'll be like, "Oh, well, that has no theology, therefore it's the religion." But I do think that like when it comes to like God, I think that there's just like one kind of principle, kind of like how the Platonists talk about the one. I'm not a Platonist, but I am like an absolute idealist. So I do believe that there is some sort of like total reality, or this
Hmm.
how would I word it? This totality to reality, which is a part of reality, like fundamentally, and not to get too wacky with like religious antics, because I know some people don't like that. Like when like religion comes into the room, some people, and I understand, but that's just my 2 cents of the situation.
There are a lot of things in there that I thought were really fascinating, and I definitely want to circle back to a couple just for the sake of time.
Yeah,
But first, I think it's really cool that you express your sexuality. I think that the fact that it's really cool to me that the fact that you stay grounded in how you feel from that perspective, like your
right.
how you identify, doesn't
Mhm.
void the fact that you also believe in an omnipotent power that sort of arcs over everything.
Yeah.
Because I know, especially for me, coming from the Carolinas, it's such a common thing for someone to, if you identify as homosexual, you're therefore immediately turned away from believing in a
Mhm.
God.
Yeah.
So it is sort of refreshing that not only do you identify that way, but you also still maintain a belief that there is something that
Yeah.
is sort of the
Right.
source of everything else.
It is. I think it's a wrong perspective to say that like, oh, since I'm this, since like I don't want to sound like self-hating or pro-church or like pro like bigotry at all, but I'll play the devil's advocate. I know people hate that. I'll play the devil's
Mm,
advocate. If I were to say and say I'm the church, if I were to say this is wrong, you should not do this, and then when someone does it, and then they like like I guess blaspheme or is very anti-Christian in a very like fundamental sense on like government or policy, it would kind of prove my point. Like if I point at this and say it's bad, and then that bad quotation marks bad thing goes off to like smear me or like to advocate for policies against me, I would kind of point and say, "See, told you so." That'd be from my perspective. I think what the community should
mm,
do is like end the whole rejection of like religion in a whole. I mean, there are a lot of gay people and people who identify like in that community as people who are like say spiritual or maybe like Hindu or Buddhist. There are a lot of people, I mean, across the world who still believe in like religion, but I think in America there is this phenomenon where a gay person automatically has to abandon religion solely because like religion has been historically against it. I think that, when it comes to the human experience, and I'm gonna get Hegelian with you. And I'm gonna do it with you. When it comes to human experience, we will constantly have these like conflicting ideas, and we will constantly have like say like the church and progressive movements. I think that eventually, and we kind of see it today, a synthesis of churches being progressive, or like progressives being church going. But yeah, I think like that's just like a very important part of the community. Not important in to say that it's good, but important to say like it's a very big cultural thing of being anti-religious, of being just this kind of like being provocative towards the church, which I don't respect. I respect almost all religions because within themselves, I think they have some sort of like part of truth. I think Christians have some sort of truthfulness to them. I don't think it's the whole truth because I'm not a Christian, of course. If I did believe that, I would have been a Christian. Or say like, I think Buddhists are like somewhat true on their like religion. I'm not a Buddhist. Pagans have like some sort of like European pagans have some sort of like truth. I'm not a European pagan, but I think all things have some sort of like semblance of truth like within them. And if you like delve like deep enough into the like theology of things and just into like the nitty gritty, you can really find really good things that talk about life and how truth relates to life, really.
Yeah, and just coming from the other side of things too, for those listening or for those watching, one thing that I find to be very important about the conversation is, I grew up in a very Southern Pentecostal strict Baptist church, with very strict guidelines. And so I have cousins who identify as homosexual or bisexual, and it was tough growing up because I would see like their own parents reject them or say, I can't attend your wedding or I can't be a part of your life because of, your sexuality or how you identify. And so as I've gotten older and I've experienced what humanity is like and interacting with people, I sort of take the opposite approach of, I don't want to express hatred or, disclude you from any type of interaction or anything like that. In fact, if anything, I'd like to talk more with people who are different so I could learn more about how you feel and why you feel that way. And so I just think that's an important lesson to take away is that, maybe even if you don't identify as Christian or you think that there are flaws in Christianity, we're still sort of, our arrows are pointed in the same direction at the end of the day. So why would I hate you or push you away or reject you when maybe I could learn something from you?
Mm-hmm. I think it's really important to say like there's like too much like distance between like people like nowadays specifically when it comes to things that may be conflicting or maybe like very very like polar in ideas. I think that there's too much like distance. Like nothing's really being done sometimes when it comes to people having different opinions. Like I feel like if we were like some time ago, I don't know if it was like different back then, quotation marks. I don't know if it was like different in like like ye olden days or anything, or maybe it wasn't. But I feel like people have more respect, I guess. And if someone had like a different, maybe not like that. Now that I think about it, or at least we should.
Less respect.
I'll just say that we should have some sort of like respect and say like, oh, you have this idea, that's interesting. I feel like nowadays, especially in like the main world, we get distracted with how good we have it, that like our biggest problem is like some guy down the street who has like a different opinion from us, and I think that it's just like way too much there's just like way too much going on in the universe to just say like I'm completely right, because I mean like every single day I think that I could be wrong, like I will always try to prove that I'm wrong so that I can like make a new idea. Like, for instance, when we first talked, I had like the wrong interpretation of Hegel. Like I probably told you a concept that I don't believe in anymore because I'm constantly trying to find just something wrong about what I'm thinking, and try to like debunking myself, I guess, I'm trying to just find something wrong with what I'm saying and fix it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of the way that evolution works and the way that adaptation works is, one of the few criticisms I had toward science, and especially hard sciences, is just the fact that you establish a hypothesis, it's testable, you test it multiple times, but ultimately 2 or 3 years down the road, it may change totally because it may be
Yeah, I
100%
know.
proven wrong and it may need to be tweaked and adjusted. And especially in psychology or philosophy, those things are also true. Like, the more that we learn and experience, it's kind of that blank slate idea, the more we take in and absorb, and we form sharper and more crisp opinions that are more accurate.
I would disagree on the blank slate. Not very Hegelian of you. Not very Hegelian of you. But no, yeah, I think that is like super important though to really like to put all that down. I think that like at the end of the day, when we come like to the table with like all our different opinions, that it's just important to know that we're all still kind of here, not knowing what's going on really. You know, like none of us like really know what's going on, but I think it's important to like at least try to get it on. It's a little bit and try our hardest.
Which is a good segue. So now let's talk about your philosophy. So let's talk about where you stand and the big important thing. So understand you believe there's a source of everything. So there's an omniscient power. What do you think about the beginning? Where do you think everything comes from?
I think everything comes from. I think there really is no beginning. I think to say something of such magnitude as like beginning is wrong. I think to say like there's something more eternal to life, or at least like the universe. I think to say like beginning is to have like this connotation that there was once not beginning, or at least like there's like a distinction between being and not being. I think the universe was always in being at some point. Maybe it was just this random assortment of nothingness, but there's also like something to conduct it to be nothingness. I think that there's no separation between like nothingness and like not nothingness, I guess to say. It's kind of confusing to like say. I think there's always some sort of being. I think God, for instance, was always there. And that to say, not to say like he's some like ageless old dude like sitting in a cloud. It's more like there's like this finite principle that is always there, this like absoluteness that's always absolute. Like you can't have non-absoluteness and then random absoluteness. It's kind of saying like if God created the universe, then who created God? I think that there is no like creator to God, or at least there is no sort of creation for something that is the creator. I mean, the capitalized. I think that saying beginning is wrong. I think that like we should like rather say like that there was like a point of life where we can like at least date it. Like there was like the Big Bang happened. And there's like, and so that creates like a new age of being, a new type of being. Like I think that to say like before that wasn't being, I think is like try to like conceptualize that into our brain, which probably could not like really understand what was going on too much. I think that like when it comes to that sort of like process of like deduction, I think it's like really hard to really say what's going on. But for me at least, I think I would say that there is no real beginning. I think there's always something eternal there, which could be God, or that could be just the universe in general. Because I do believe that the universe itself is a direct extension from God, in a certain tweaked way, in a Hegelian way, of course. But I think that there really wasn't a beginning. It's rather what we could call our beginning, and our age of the universe.
Yeah, there are a couple of interesting things there. So one thing that I think is really cool, and when it comes to at least my faith as a Christian, is translation. So translation is huge because whenever we translate things, especially like scripture, obviously things get changed and tweaked through translation, and we can't read it the way that it was originally intended or written. So just the very first three words, like in the beginning, obviously I understand that the original was in a beginning. So a lot of people are kind of scratching their head as a result, because they're like, what does that mean? Why is it in a beginning and not the beginning? And so that kind of touches on a little bit of what you're describing. But for me, one of the big arguments I feel like for God is just kind of what you said, that, nothing can come from, something can't come from nothing, in my opinion. So there has to be a something that has this eternal quality, at least, or this infinite quality, whether that be the universe or whether that be a higher power. But I think that's one of the more convincing arguments just for us too, like, because obviously there was a time that I didn't exist. My consciousness
Yeah.
was not here, and I don't have any perception of that. But then I was here. So like there was a mechanism for that. And that's sort of a micro picture of how the universe works. Like if there was a time of nothingness, where did it all come from? And there has to be some type of mechanism kind of thing.
Right. Absolutely. I think that that's like pretty spot on. At least if like I could know what happened like in the beginning, I think that would probably be to some extent like what's going on, that there can't be like nothing from like creating from something, or at least like the opposite way. But I could never like really be like an atheist. Like even when I had my phases of not being religious, I could never like really be an atheist, because I could never believe that there was just like nothingness to like so much something, or like so much being can have like just like such like nothingness. I mean, I think that like atheist makes sense when it comes to like this kind of like personal like relationship with God. I don't think that's possible, but I think like on that subject, I think they're right. I don't think like you could have like a personal like relationship or like interaction with God. I think like you could like interact. The only way that like for me, how you would like interact for like with God would just be like interacting with like truth, and what Hegel would say truth would be like the culmination of like human experience. It would be the culmination of all these like things, and which are shown in things like art and music and just like movements like that, which like encapsulate what truth is on more of like an absolute level. Because like truth, like it does 2 + 2 = 4 really like mean 4, like it's kind of like that's truth. We don't really need to like talk about that too much. What Hegel would say, and I don't mean to like bootleg Hegel so much, but I'm a Hegelian, so I kind of have to listen to him, I guess. So, but it would be like truths like tiny, like which are truths, so this is important. But truths like like the shirt that I'm wearing is made out of wool. It is. I don't think we have to deduct that it's not wool, or that it's not truly a shirt if you think about it. I think that that's truthfulness. That's still truthfulness. It's purposeness. Like being on purpose to like be be truthful. Sorry, I'm like losing my words. I think that there's like smaller truths that we can like know and like understand. But when it comes to like these overarching truths of like what is knowledge, what is like it mean to have knowledge, or what does it mean to have like experience in something? I think, or like what is reality? I think these are truths that we have to figure out and we have to understand. I think talking about like what's the meaning of like life, I think like these kind of things are more subjective sometimes, and sometimes truth doesn't mean absolute truth. It just means like some sort of personalistic truth, or maybe even like not truth at all. It just like might be correct. Some people would argue, could knowledge be truth? Or could what we know be truthful? We might say yes or no to that, but that's a whole different argument at that point. And then like you have like a few more hours of like podcast content, because we can just talk about, is reality really true, or something like that.
Yeah, I'm curious, speaking on a little bit, tying into that, the topic of truth. And by the way, for any of those listening, there is a really cool like side episode of the podcast where I talked to my friend Ethan about simulation theory. So definitely check that out if you're into this kind of thing. But one thing that I think is interesting is morality. Where does morality come from? And I guess part of that question too for you, and I'm curious what your thought is do we have godlike qualities? Do some of our traits and do some of our behaviors come from this higher power, or is everything developed like as a species as we've evolved and sort of adapted to the world around us?
Well, I think that we have some sort of like soul. I think all things kind of have that. So like as like a basis, we do have like the mind and the intellect. But that ties into the soul. That ties into the spirit. With Hegel's big Geist, with spirit, it translates the spirit Geist, and you hear it a lot in his writing. But I think people kind of connotate it with spirit too much, because it's a uniquely German word, because it means mind and Geist. Geist would kind of be like what's the opposite of nature, so like Geist would be your spirit, your soul, your mind, all the things that move in the background of like physical reality. There's this Geist, which is kind of like the process of things. It's the spirit that kind of collects and experiences. That's why I said earlier that I don't believe in the blank slate theory, because a part of Hegel's like theory is that kind of humans evolve in this way where we experience things and then we collectivize it on like a level that is spiritual almost. Like for instance, there's this kind of like I'm trying to put into words how we've had like these ideas that were just basically wrong back then, like on the topic of morality. If you went a few hundred years ago and asked someone, "Hey, do you want to like pillage this village?" They'd say, "Yeah, sure. I got nothing to do." Nowadays, you're like, "What? That is so weird of you. Why would you want to kill somebody? That's wrong. That's wrong." But back then, they didn't care. If you stole from if you were some like I guess like Viking stealing from some like Northumbrian monk or something like that, you didn't care. It was just what you did. And I think morality has a lot to do with that. I think morality is about situation and experience with things. We don't have to pillage for resources, so we view it as innately wrong. My personal opinion of morality is I do believe in absolute morality. I believe that like morality ultimately is subjective. I think that some people might view some things worse than others, which doesn't mean like they're not as bad, of course, on like just like a humane level. But some like cultural differences might have just, for instance, some people would view it as wrongful or evil if a woman didn't cover her head, or if a man didn't like open the door for a woman, or if a man didn't completely take care of his household like through and through. Usually these cultural things are ultimately subjective when it comes to morality. But I do believe that when it comes to a society, that morality becomes objective because of a duty to it. Kind of like what Kant said. Kant would say that you should conduct morality on a level where it's more like a duty to do it. Like, I should be moral because it's my duty to society and to people in general, really, to perform good actions. Not because I want to do good, but because I want to do good by my fellow man, pretty much, or my community, I guess you can say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it kind of sounds like there are these absolute things that exist, like absolute morality, or the qualities that maybe a higher power or God would have, like these absolute truths, but that the human factor kind of infiltrates that a little bit. So it becomes more subjective because each society and each cult, each group of people have their own way of life and the way that they've adapted to life. And so that absolute truth or that absolute, morality may get shifted a little bit just for survival or for progression or whatever the case may be.
Well, I wouldn't say that we have an aspect. I think to say that we have an aspect of God which forms itself in morality is wrong. I think God doesn't have a morality, or at least there is some like morality given to us by God. I don't really believe in that. I think there is like ultimately good things that are good. Like for instance, like giving to the poor is ultimately good, but I don't believe on like a spiritual level that is good. I do believe that what we connotate as good is really, I wouldn't say man-made things. I think them being man-made doesn't like lessen their importance. It's still important to like not kill people or don't steal from people. We don't have to like, and I'm not trying to be like a negative to people who do believe in like in a morality, like system from God. Maybe I don't think that we would need like a book given to us by God to tell us like, hey, you shouldn't steal things. I mean, sometimes we do. Some people do, some people who are like really problematic, I guess, in society. But I think when it comes to like, for instance, my personal experience, maybe not the same as yours, but I would never want to do bad that I didn't need to do because it's simply not something that I would have to do. My innate, like actions in the universe would be neutral, maybe good. They're not necessarily great. I sometimes give to people who need it because I kind of need it too sometimes. So or sometimes I'm greedy. Sometimes I'm gluttonous. Sometimes I do these things that aren't good, but it's necessary to to, I think, distinct that there is no, or at least it's important for me to say like there is no morality that was given by God. I think that morality is more of a creation, which doesn't lessen its overall importance to society. Like as Kant would say, I'm going to keep going back to Kant because I do believe in Kant's moral theory. That is that you just need to be doing ultimately what you know as good solely because that is what is to be done, not because you want to be a good person, but necessarily you know that there are things that you should do that are just almost lawful, and that's what you're supposed to do.
Do you think that there are places in the world or maybe culture or societies where like murder or stealing or pillaging is correct or is appropriate or is okay, or are those just absolutely wrong no matter what?
I do believe that murder is absolutely wrong. I think that you could never truthfully get away with murder, but I do think that there is like this wrong. I do think that there is this wrongness innately to murder, but at the same time, I think both you and me, and well, maybe not, or at least some like what people like overall in history have concluded is that murder is like overall always wrong. But there is just so many wrongs that you have to do in just living that sometimes you just can't get away from. Like for instance, some people need to steal to eat. Some people need to just make a shortcut in life because they couldn't not have a shortcut. There are just some things that you have to do that I think that you couldn't not do. And when it is evil like that, I think that that's when it comes to murder and like self-defense, of course, on a personal or like national level, I think it's usually justified when it's situations like that. But I think it's not to say like justified means good. I think it's important to say justified just means justified. It doesn't mean that the wrong is not good or the good is not wrong. I think it remains the same, but I think that it is just, we can be rational with it and say like, yeah, we had to, not be too friendly with those terrorists that were trying to kill children. We can't allow that, or just like a hypothetical situation where there's just a bad group of people with an overall like wacky idea. I don't think that we should, have to rationalize it too much to a point where we forget where we are. I think sometimes we rationalize too much and we forget where we're coming from. Like I shouldn't have to rationalize. I'm not trying to like be like negative or anything. I'm like just trying to say it to put into words. I shouldn't have to rationalize, not someone. I think we should all know that is instantly bad, not good thing, no bueno. I don't think that we should have to rationalize that sort of thing, and you can't justify that ever. I think that you just have to like understand like there are just wrong things and like wrong people do wrong things, or I guess sometimes you wouldn't say wrong people quotation. You just say like people in general are capable of doing really really evil things, and I think something like that when it comes to unexcusable evils, I think that's where you're coming into the point where now you're talking about an absolute, almost like spiritual thing. Like I think like our overall reaction to like say it's like something has been historically pure evil. When someone violates a woman, say like abuses her, historically, I think that you could say like most cultures would view that as extremely wrong. I mean, like if you were in public and you hit a woman, you would have multiple men around you probably being violent with you. Is that justified? I mean, that's where you have to rationalize the justification of being violent, and you have all this tumbling reactions of, well, how do we rationalize this? And I think that's why sometimes we rationalize too much when it comes to things that are purely evil, like or slavery, which I will say slavery was popular back in the day in the olden days of like Rome, or not too long ago in like the South, of course, of America. Slavery was viewed as almost necessary, and I think that nowadays it would be evil, but I don't think that you could compare it to an absolute evil like that we've historically known as evil. I think that that's like the violation of a woman would be almost spiritually evil in a way. I don't believe in an afterlife, but I do think that that's something that could be connotated with that.
Yeah, what comes to mind, my dad has mentioned before, and I agree to an extent that, if we were in the situation that someone invaded our home and they came in with a weapon like a
Yeah.
gun and their intent was to take our life, if I had to defend my home and self-preservation, if I had to take that person's life, obviously that's my only choice in that situation.
Mm.
However, I wouldn't feel good about it. Obviously, I would come out of that situation with a lot of trauma. It would be painful. It would be difficult. It would be stressful. Like there are all these like negative feelings that sort of innately develop as a result of taking another person's life, regardless of the situation. And I think that that's a good indicator and a good way to sort of point ourselves back to the absolute value is, we know right from wrong, and we can sort of deduce from the reaction of other people and the long-term effects of what we're doing and the, the kind of repercussions that come with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to not to. This sounds kind of like counterproductive to someone like who's so hell bent on being rational. I think sometimes we rationalize morality too much, where we forget that we're trying to, like morality is supposed to teach us, how to like just behave. I don't think that we should
Mm-hmm.
really, have to consider if someone invades my home, do I have a right to kill them? Yeah. Yeah. Is that good? No. But I think that
Right.
it's wrong evidently. I'm sorry, eventually, then like we can come to say that these things are wrong, and that's kind of where it ends. I think the morality is one thing that's over rational. I do believe that over rationalization is sometimes a problem in the world, and people
Mm-hmm.
try to be skeptical of too much and try to n- just negate too many things that are just factual. I don't think that morality is factual, of course. Like I said, yeah, I do think that it's subjective. I think that we shouldn't. I don't want to repeat myself. I think that we should not rationalize doing something that's bad to make it good. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
important.
For sure. So before we move into this final segment, because I have a fun little activity that I do with all of my guests, but is there
Okay.
anything else that you wanted to kind of go over or anything else you want to bring up or discuss before we kind of transition to the end point here?
Uh, well, I don't know what the endpoint is, so I couldn't like really say. But the only thing that I could like really give a good like I would try to like explain like reality. I guess like I do think that most people don't like understand reality too much, and like it's just like this tiny little topic of saying that like reality is more often a reflection of your consciousness rather than reality and your consciousness being a reflection on like your consciousness being a reflection of like the material reality. I think it's the opposite way, and I don't know if there's much to talk about on that, but that was a part of my opinion that I know some people find weird and kind of quirky, but that is one of my opinions that I think that I had to say just to get it out there and just get it off my chest that yes, I do believe that like material reality is more often a condition that we create, and yeah, there's that. Oh, and I know this one people hate this one. I don't believe math is real. I don't mean that in like a conspiracy theory. I mean that in like there's people believe that math is like the construction of the universe or God speaks to us with math. I think that that's wrong. I think I think how could you really value like numbers without there being a connotation to it? I think numbers are kind of like a prescription of a thing rather than numbers being like an absolute thing. I know a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people don't like that one. That's one of my opinions. That's more controversial, I guess. Numbers aren't real.
Hmm.
Fight me. One of those kind of situations. But yeah.
I would argue that because my wife believes that birds aren't real. My wife believes that the government replaced all of
No.
the
Yeah.
pigeons with robots to spy on us. So I would argue that part
Hmm.
of that is just your hatred for math.
Maybe. No. Oh my God, that could be true. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, we did talk about how I was really bad at math, and here I am trying to disprove it entirely. Yeah, that's a good point.
It's like in a world without math, we'd all be happier, right?
I think so. I think so.
All right. Well, before we wrap up here, there is a little activity that I like to do with my guest. It is a series of questions, series of 10 questions, and the way it's designed is it's basically going to come right off the top of your head. So whatever answer that pops into your brain, that's the answer that we want.
Mm, okay. It's kind of like a psychology
Alrighty.
quest.
Kind of. Well, it's just like a little come up for air moment, so people who are listening or watching can get to know you a little bit in less of
Okay.
like a conceptual way and more of in just like a here's my favorite color kind of way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I understand that.
Alrighty. So, first question: what's your favorite word?
My favorite what? Sorry, you kind of cut out.
What's your favorite word?
My favorite word? Uh, I wouldn't
Yes.
know. It would probably be something like because I say that a lot. Like that's my favorite word because I just have a hard time trying to like convey opinion or convey my thoughts. Just go like this.
It's like a Y apostrophe. It's like a little like phrase, more of a not a real word. It's like a conjunction.
Yeah, yes. It's kind of like my made up word, but like that is kind of like what I I just say that a lot. Like if it's like one of my favorite words, it's probably going to be like my most used like saying or word. I say like a lot. I don't mean to, but my brain just defaults on it.
What's your least favorite word?
My least favorite word, man, I don't really have one. I guess words that I can't spell. I suppose would probably be like all words that I can't spell. That'd be my least favorite words. I couldn't like really tell you what my least favorite word could be. No, actually, I do have one. Those like little like nuts that like you open up. They're like the packaging like green pistachios. I can never pronounce it.
Hmm.
Like pistachios. I can never pronounce it correctly. So I hate that word. That's my least favorite word to say.
Okay. What excites you?
Um, God, I'm trying to like not sound like a nerd, but what excites me is usually when there's like a new video of like something that like I'm really interested in. Like right now, like I'm really interested in like Skyrim lore. So when there's
Hmm.
like someone like my favorite like YouTuber like drops like a new like video about Skyrim lore, that's pretty good. Or when I get a new book because I have a problem with buying books. When a new book comes in, I'm like pretty excited, so that's pretty good.
Okay.
It'd be a tie between
What
those two.
upsets you?
What upsets me the most
Yes.
when people are just not very polite. I try to be very polite and very open minded or very just go with the flow. When someone's not that polite, like they're rude to me or like they're just not very like precautious or precautious. I mean, I this kind of irks me. Like I always like go home in a bad mood because like my coworkers won't say bye to me. That's so petty, but I'd be like, wow, they didn't say bye to me. I'm so upset.
What sound or noise do you love?
What sound or noise I love? Rain. I love rain because in the South, in Texas, I didn't get rain, so I love the sound of rain. That's just amazing for me. I fall asleep to that, so that's just like the sound that I go to listen to. I guess
What sound or noise do you hate?
with styrofoam, I can't take styrofoam. Like styrofoam drinks. Like have you ever put styrofoam like a drink like a styrofoam cup like on top of like a wooden table? I like cringe every single time. Like I have to like hold my cup like in my hand because like I refuse to put it down on the table. I like just hold it the entire time. I just can't take it.
What motivates you to act every day when you wake up?
Um, Probably my partner because that's kind of like the go-to. Like oh I shouldn't like oh I don't want to get out of bed, but yeah. Never mind, I just should. I should go like say, like go call like my partner or something like that, or just say how they're doing or something like that. Just I guess
Hmm.
that's like that sounds kind of cheesy. That sounds kind of corny, but I think that is my go-to like reason on why I do get out of bed, I guess, or just live in general.
What profession would you like to attempt?
I would love to be a professor. That is my go-to. I want to
Oh
be a
yeah.
professor so badly, or just a teacher, but a professor because that sounds kind of cooler, I guess. But definitely something in like the educational field.
Okay, so what profession would you not like to do?
A profession that I wouldn't like to do, probably something in the service industry. Because right now I work at a
Hmm.
restaurant, and I can't do it for long. My body just cannot uphold this. I worked in a grocery store too when I was in high school, so Just nothing that has to do with like customer service at this point. I just cannot.
That's fair. And then the last question: if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
That's a pretty good one. I'd like him to. Okay, I would like to have like Okay, what I would love is to have like a conversation with God. If that was like the ultimate truth of that God like had a heaven for me, I would really hope that he like that he just started a conversation with me about like what I was wrong about, because I really do want to know just like what I got right or wrong, like while just like living life. I would love him to just say you were wrong about this. You were kind of right about that, and yeah, this you're completely wrong about. And I would be satisfied to know that I was wrong a little bit.
Yeah, I mean that's I've never heard that, but that would be kind of cool if you encounter God and there's like a checklist. Here are the 200 concepts that you were right on, and here are the 6,000 that you just totally blew.
It's kind of like a quiz. All of life is just a quiz, and like you you eventually just see how you did.
All right. Well, Chance, thank you for doing this. This has been a lot of fun. I think it's been a really good conversation. We had a lot of really cool topics, and I'd love to have you come back and do this again. What I normally do with my guest is I'm going to give you the final word. So anything you'd like to say before we sign off?
To like the main viewer of the podcast, I guess, not just you alone. Try. I guess I gotta get philosophical. I gotta get deep with it. Sentimental. Try to. I guess I'm trying to like instruct people. I don't like to tell people what to do, but if I guess the listener cares enough to listen to me, I mean that kind of is what he's doing, or she. If you want to, you. What I do believe is like a really good character builder is it's like going out into new experiences. Like for instance, when I moved to California, all I had was like a briefcase and a backpack, and that's all I had to go to California with. I think like what the biggest thing about life is having experience, and the only way to really know what's going on in life, and sorry, to really know what's going on in life, you have to have just experience living life and just like seeing all the negative and all the positive, mostly negative, but I think that's how you really get down to like the nitty gritty of like how to live life and what's the meaning of life. I think you have to have just a lot of time on your hands to really know what's going on, because no one really knows, but we can get close enough to where we can at least be satisfied.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's perfect. And thank you again. We're going to sign off, and I'll talk to you on the next time.